Swami Swaroopananda, senior disciple of Swami Vishnu-devananda, conducts questions and answers at the 50th anniversary Shivananda Yoga Camp.
I have a daughter. She's 29 years old. Still I have the feeling I am abandoning her. How to overcome this feeling?
By joining stuff.
I wish to have your advice. From time to time, I feel the spiritual desire is too strong. What can I do to bring the mind back to balance and to cool it down?
Strengthen the spiritual desire.
How to carry out the last two stages of life in a Western society?
This is equal to all. In the Western society, for example, when a person gets to an old age, his or her own family many times will put the person into an old people home. Swamiji told us, before the world kicks you, you kick the world. This was Swamiji's advice. Before the world kicks you, you kick the world. So, whether in an Eastern society or in a Western society, every person can enter into the last stages of life, which are vanaprastha and sannyasa. To join the vanaprastha stage, simply become a staff in an ashram. This is the way to do it. In old days, people will go to the forest to a hermitage, both the husband and wife together, and they will enter into the third stage. Nowadays, in the West or in the East, the way to do it, if you can, come to an ashram and become staff. And then regarding the fourth stage of life, the life of a sannyasi, after a few good years of practice as a staff, you can approach the acharya, the spiritual preceptor in that ashram, and request initiation into the fourth stage, which is the stage of sannyasa. Of course, the acharya will need to agree. Also, you may need some preparation and preliminary training. But this is definitely possible. This is also well within our tradition. I don't see any reason why a Westerner cannot enter into the third and fourth stage of life. It depends on our desire, it depends on our will, and it depends on our understanding. It also depends on our prarabdha karma. Means it depends on the karma that comes from the past and matures and manifests in this life. In fact, prarabdha karma is also a very important factor. But Swami Shivananda would say, do not bleed karma like a sheep. Don't say karma, the karma brought me to this, but roar, om, like a lion of Vedanta. This is what Swami Shivananda said. Don't say, this is my destiny, therefore I cannot take sannyasa. Exert your willpower and exercise your free will. This is what Swami Shivananda would say. And this is what we learned from Swamiji. Swamiji never looked only at the fact of prarabdha karma. We always say that we have to exercise our free will. And the free will does exist. And of course we need the blessings of the Guru and the blessings of God to be successful in entering these last two stages of life. So, to summarize it, I believe that even a Westerner, if he desires so, can enter into the last two stages of life. So whoever asks this question, I would recommend to try and do it. That's my recommendation.
What is the most recent agreement or meeting of the minds of yoga and science?
Starting with the 20th century, many scientific institutions in the world have been researching the different yogic practices. This had been going for many, many years. I remember 25 years ago I was interested in this subject, and I went to a major university and I pulled out, with their permission, many medical researches that were done on the topic of yoga. At that time there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of published researches. Today there are many more. Today any aspect of yoga is being researched scientifically. As for the meeting of the minds, scientists know that there is something true about yoga and about the yogic practices. There is a lot of emphasis in the subject of healing, the subject of yoga and healing. But scientists also notice other things. For example, the effect of the yoga practices on the mind. As you know, nowadays neuroscience is very popular, and neuroscientists are investigating what is the effect of the practice of yoga in all of its aspects on the human mind. And the results are wonderful. Also, there is a lot of research in what is called psychic phenomena. We don't call it psychic phenomena, we call it astral phenomena. We know that there are many levels of existence. For many years, scientists thought that this is superstition. Nowadays, there is an increased interest in this subject, the subject of science and psychic phenomena. So I believe that there is a meeting of minds, and I believe that the younger generation of scientists are much more open to the subject matter of yoga, of meditation, and of subtle phenomena. And we see a change. We even see a change in the paradigm. We see even a change in the worldview of science, where more and more scientists are putting consciousness as the foundation of all existence. More and more and more scientists are speaking about consciousness as the foundation of all existence. And of course, this is a fundamental teaching within Vedanta. So we see this more and more and more and more. In fact, scientists are researching all different types of things. For example, both myself and Swami Swaroopananda, we heard a renowned scientist speaking about what is the truth of the siddhis mentioned in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This scientist took upon it himself just to research this topic. Many scholars say that this is just a myth, that this is allegorical. But this scientist has been working on it for many years, and he demonstrated in lab that many of the siddhis that the yogis speak about are true, and he's going to publish a book about it this year. Now, for us, we say that the siddhis are just byproduct of the practices, and they are not the goal of the practice. We know they are even considered to be an obstacle to the higher practices of yoga. But for scientists, this is a revolution to accept these siddhis as factual things, because it will require them to change their paradigm. It will require them to change the worldview in order to understand this phenomenon. So I think that the meeting of minds is taking place, and it's increasing.
What is Tantra Yoga according to Swami Shivananda?
In India, there are different types of scriptures, and they belong to different categories. For example, the Vedas, which are considered to be divine revelations that originate from a level of consciousness which is beyond the human mind. They have a non-human origin. They are revelation. These are the Vedas. And then there are different categories of scriptures. For example, we have the Dharma Shastras. Dharma Shastras means the scriptures which deal with Dharma. There are many, many scriptures. Then we have the Itihasas. Itihasas, these are friendly scriptures which explain what the Vedas are teaching, but in a friendly way. For example, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and so on, are Itihasas. Then we have the Puranas, which are a category of scriptures which are both friendly. Friendly in the sense that they explain the same things that are in the Vedas, but in a friendly way, in the form of stories and so on. They also talk about ancient history, and they are devotional scriptures. These are scriptures which focus on bhakti or devotion. And then there is another category of scriptures which are called darshana. Darshana, these are the philosophical systems of India, like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and so on. And then there is another category of scriptures which are called agama. And these agamas, or these scriptures, are divided into three categories. The Shakta agamas, the agamas which are talking about the Divine Mother, the Universal Mother. The Vaishnava agamas, the agamas which focus on Lord Vishnu, and the Shaiva agamas, the agamas which focus on Lord Shiva. All the tantras belong to these three groups. There are tantras which originate in the Shakta agamas, in those scriptures that speak about the Divine Mother. There are other tantras which originate in the Vaishnava agamas, in the agamas that are focused on Lord Vishnu as the main deity. And also there are tantras which belong to the Shaiva agamas, which focus on Lord Shiva as the main deity. In all the tantras, most of the teaching is described as a dialogue between Lord Shiva and his consort, Parvati. Sometimes Parvati is the teacher and Lord Shiva is the student. Other times Parvati is the student and Lord Shiva is the teacher. Now, in all this category of scriptures, most of the scriptures derive their authority from the Vedas. But those that are following the agamas are saying that the agamas themselves, like the Vedas, are revealed scriptures. So within these agamas we have texts which are called tantras, and they are like encyclopedias of esoteric knowledge. They include many, many topics. But they are called sometimes mantra shastras. They are called scriptures that deal with mantras. And sometimes they will be called sadhana shastras, scriptures which deal with spiritual practices. But they are encyclopedic in scope. They will tell you things like how to build a temple, how to shape a murti, a statue of a deity. They deal with things, how to conduct a festival, and how to conduct pujas or sacred rituals. So many things are there. And very esoteric things, like yoga, different types of yoga, like how to attain moksha, how to attain spiritual liberation, and so on. Some of the tantras are dualistic by nature, some of the tantras are non-dualistic by nature, and so on. So out of those schools, those scriptures, the agamas, represent schools of thought within India. They represent lineages of practice within India. And those lineages, in general, are the lineages which follow the tantras. They follow these revealed scriptures. And then in the West, there have been a hyper-focus on one of the aspects which are related to the tantras, and this is the aspect of utilizing sexual techniques for the purpose of spiritual progress. So my feeling was, when I observed or followed this interest in the West, that people were more interested in the sex than in the tantra, than in the, you see. People were interested more in the sex aspect than in the spiritual liberation. This was what I observed. People were very excited about it, because in the West, as you know, the Western religions are much more repressed in this domain. So after the revolution that took place in the West in the 60s, people were very excited about the progressive spiritual practices of India, because they said, oh look, they are using sex for spiritual realization. But this is not exactly so. Swami Shivananda explains very clearly. Tantras are secret scriptures and they use a symbolic language. So he himself would say, Swami Shivananda himself would say, the Tantras are misunderstood in the West, and in order to study Tantras, you need a guru. You need to be initiated, and you need to be introduced to all of these teachings by a guru. Now, of course, you have the Hindu Tantra and you have the Buddhistic Tantra, and also there are things which are called left-hand Tantra, right-hand Tantra, and all these sexual practices that are mentioned are mainly coming from the left-hand Tantra. Left-hand Tantra, the left-hand Tantras are Tantras which, without proper guidance and proper supervision, they can be problematic and they can be dangerous. And generally speaking, the tantric practices are not done without a guidance. So Swami Shivananda was very clear about it. He suggests to follow the pure tantras. The pure tantras are tantras which are not involved heavily in impure practices. Because in tantra the idea is that you can utilize even impure things and transform them in order to attain higher purposes. For example, in many of the yogic practices we say you have to control the energy, you have to control the energy of lust, so like in brahmacharya. We need to control the sexual energy and to sublimate it. In some of the tantric scriptures and texts it is said you can take this energy of desire, which is an obstacle, and transform it and utilize its energy for spiritual progress. So many people were excited about it, but they don't understand that this type of practices are only for very advanced practitioners, and anyway they are risky because they deal with impure things. And one thing about Tantra, what's said in the Tantric scriptures is that the Tantric practices can lead you very fast to heaven, but as fast to hell. This is their nature. Either you go up or you really go down and fast. So Swami Shivananda said, stay away from the dangerous practices of left-hand Tantra and stick to the pure practices of right-hand Tantra. We don't say that the left-hand Tantra practices are not valid, but we say that they are for the few, for very advanced practitioners, which it's their own karma to follow these practices. Also, Swamiji told us, Swami vishnu-devananda told us, that the sexual practices of Tantra are mainly meant for householders. They are not meant for sannyasis, for monks, and they are not meant for brahmacharis, for students that follow the vows of celibacy. They are meant for householders, and indeed, in many tantric texts, it is said that these practices are meant for householders. So there have been an over-focus in the West on the sexual practices of left-hand Tantra. And they are not only sexual practices. For example, you find in Tantra things like drinking alcohol, eating meat, and all these type of things which are considered to be impure. Swami Shivananda explains these are symbols. You need to understand them correctly. You cannot just take them literally. I would suggest the questioner to read the chapter about Tantra in Bliss Divine by Swami Shivananda. It's a wonderful chapter. If you read it, you're going to get a lot of insight regarding the view of Swami Shivananda about Tantra. Many of our own practices originate from Tantra. For example, the pujas that we conduct. The pujas which have the 16 parts, they originate from Tantra. Hatha Yoga originates from the Tantric school. The sub-schools of Raja Yoga belong to the Tantric realm, like Mantra Yoga, Laya Yoga, or Kundalini Yoga, Hatha Yoga, and so on. They belong to Tantra. But they belong to what Swami Shivananda will call the pure Tantra, the right-hand Tantra. So, to summarize it, Swami Shivananda acknowledges the greatness of Tantra, but he recommends to stay on the safe side and to practice the pure tantric practices and to stay away from the dangerous tantric practices which are utilizing impure things in order to progress spiritually.
Some Rajasic, Tamasic teachers and students.
Okay. Oh, thank you. For those of you that have taken the yoga teacher training course, in the yoga teacher training course there is a class about 3 types of teachers and 3 types of students. Like anything else in yoga, here also there is a division according to Sattva Guna, Raja Guna and Tamo Guna. So of course, Tamasic or Rajasic students or teachers may take any teaching and misunderstand it or pervert it. And we can see this also in the West, but not only in the West. We also see it in India. For example, there are teachers which may take advantage of their students under the pretext that these practices are tantric practices, that they are teaching them tantra. This has nothing to do with true tantra. There are also students which are interested in things like powers. For example, tantra deals a lot with powers, but powers are only byproducts of yogic practices. They are never the goal of yogic practices. Yogic practices' goal is wisdom and devotion, and ultimately moksha or spiritual liberation, never powers. Powers are only byproducts. Many people are very much interested in powers. So you have Tamasic and Rajasic students which are interested in those things that we know about, which are sex and power, and what's the third thing, Srinivasa? Sex, power, and there's one more thing.
Fame.
That's right, money. So worldly people are interested in money, sex, and power. Then when they approach spiritual practices, they are also interested in money, sex, and power by utilizing advanced spiritual methods, right? So Swami Shivananda would say, just stay away from these things and stick to the pure spiritual path and have it as your goal, the true spiritual goal, which is moksha or spiritual liberation. And stay away from money, sex, and power, because money, sex, and power has ruined many, many people. Okay.
Did Swami Vishnu talk about the connection to other Guru Bhais of Swami Shivananda? And are there any active programs now or planned in the future with the different lineages that come out of Swami Shivananda and this organization?
When Swami vishnu-devananda came to the West, initially he was bringing to our ashrams the different disciples of Swami Shivananda. For example, to this ashram, he brought more than one time different disciples of Swami Shivananda. In 1979, when I took my sannyas initiation, there was a festival here which was called the Festival of Inner Light. And many of the direct disciples of Master, the great disciples of Master were here. Swami Chidananda was here, and Swami Nada Brahmananda, Swami Nityananda, Swami Ridhyananda, and other disciples were here. And through the years, Swamiji brought different disciples of the Master, like Swami Venkateshananda, and so on. And so the connection was there all through. And as for now, as you know, there is a new generation of acharyas, both in this organization and also in Divine Life Society. Still, some of the direct disciples of Master are alive, but slowly they are passing away. And now the relationship is between the new generations, and it is my belief that the relationship develops or evolves. For example, the relationship between this organization and the Integral Yoga organization that was founded by Swami Satchidananda, or the relationship between this organization and Divine Life Society in Rishikesh. So it is my belief that this relationship evolves, and it's. I also believe that the Guru is happy when there are good relationship between the Guru Bhais, between his disciples. But it doesn't always happen. We also need to understand something. If you look at the history of spiritual movements, if you look at the history of religion, spiritual movements and so on, you'll see that you had one good teacher, one good guru, and then you can see that out of the guru many disciples came, and then you had many lineages emerging from one guru, different schools, sometimes conflicting with each other in their view or in their spiritual view, because different disciples will understand the teachings of the same guru differently. Fortunately, in this organization, this is not the case. The organization is together and strong. And also, it's my belief that nowadays, and also previously, but nowadays, there is a good relationship between this organization and Divine Life Society. And I think also that the connection is getting stronger and stronger. So, but it is a natural thing to see how different disciples are interpreting the teachings differently, and each one creating his or her own path or lineages. This happened all through history. I don't see a reason why it should not continue to happen.
What will be the spiritual journey of this ashram and organization for the next 50 years?
I don't think that anyone knows. I really don't think so. Okay. That's it. Okay.
Okay, Om Namah Shivaya.